Welcome to Gutsy Talks. I'm Rachel Larson, your host, naturopath and nutritionist, and I'm here to have real, honest conversations that can help you heal your gut, calm your mind, and fall back in love with food. Together with leading health experts, we'll dive into all things gut health and explore the deep connections between your gut and overall well-being, so you can feel empowered to take control of your health and live your best life. If you love all things gut health, follow me for more on Instagram at rachel.larson or head to rachellarson.com.au. Now, let's get into today's episode. Today, I'm joined by the incredible Sandra Villella, a naturopath, herbalist, and educator with almost 30 years of clinical experience. Sandra has a special interest in supporting women's health at every stage, from puberty right through to the pregnancy years, to perimenopause and menopause. She's not only a highly respected practitioner, but also a beloved teacher to many naturopaths in my industry, myself included, and has spoken at countless events sharing her evidence-informed, practical wisdom on women's health. Sandra's mission is simple but powerful: to provide sensible, balanced information that helps women make informed choices and improve their health in real sustainable ways. In today's episode, we're diving into perimenopause, menopause, and the microbiome, unpacking what's really happening in the body during this transition and what women can do to feel more empowered, informed, and supported through it all. Hello, Sandra, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Rachel. I'm very excited to be here, actually.
I'm so excited too. We were just having like a laugh off record and about like how this feels like it feels like a long time coming to have you as a guest on the pod. I was telling you that you've been mentioned a couple of times in different episodes throughout, so we've been like really prepping the audience for your presence and your knowledge that you're about to share. And of course, we're going to be talking about linseeds because we
Absolutely.
know they're your favorite. But for anyone who also didn't know, which I'm sure no one really does, but you are also my lecturer when I was going through my training. So it feels really nice to have this conversation with you, be interviewing you on now the podcast.
Oh, that's lovely. And it's also lovely for me as your past lecturer to see how amazing you are going and the fabulous work that you do. I love that you just strip it down and you make it real. It's really so beautiful to watch. And also now we get to be gym buddies at the same
Yes.
gym, at our local gym. So that's a fantastic thing to do. There's three Fairfield naturopaths in the same gym sometimes, which is
Yeah,
which is fun.
it's a healthy little community we have.
Absolutely.
And, that's what we're here for today as well, the real stripping down of what can be this really complex topic. And of course, there is complexities to menopause and perimenopause and the microbiome, but we want to get, I guess, as simple as we can today, because again, like we were talking beforehand, there's stuff that people don't know that's a game changer. And you were even saying in your
Mm,
own clinic, you would be prescribing things and you're like, oh gosh, this is so simple. And yet patients
mm.
come back saying, wow, I feel a whole lot better. So we want to really talk about those
Yes.
big foundational things that people can do that can make a huge difference to what at the moment is just like this really overwhelming, confusing, part of their life.
Absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. It is really confusing. There is a lot of information out there and there's a lot of misinformation. There's a term called meno washing that
Oh
has come
gosh.
out now. And it really, we're in this very it's great that there's so much information for perimenopause and menopause, but we're in also a very pro hormone therapy and estrogen phase where everything is, oh, it's all because you've got, because of estrogen. Sort of,
Yeah.
if you go historically back to 2002, where the Women's Health Initiative came out, and pretty much 30% of all women around the world stopped taking their hormone therapy because, their headlines, they woke up to headlines that hormone therapy increases your risk of breast cancer by 29%.
Yeah.
And so there's this whole generation that didn't actually use hormone therapy and everyone was scared. And now there's lots of very influential people in social media that are talking about menopause. Sometimes they're giving great information, sometimes they're giving misinformation, and also in the wellness space, I think
Mm.
there's a lot. So I'm really looking forward to kind of giving some sensible, evidence-based and traditional
Yeah.
evidence to try and help people navigate through this time.
Well, that's why you're here, Sandra. We know how
Yes,
good you are at it. So let's start with really setting the scene.
yes.
I think most people listening to this will have an idea, but can we please talk about, I guess, real the definition and those key markers or those key kind of things that indicate that a perimenopausal or a menopausal state?
Great. Yes. So menopause literally means your last menstrual period, and you don't know it's your last menstrual period until you're 12 months after not having a period. And it's difficult if you've had a hysterectomy. If your
Mm,
uterus has come out, you're not going to know it's your last menstrual period. So those people are going to need to have a blood test, particularly to look at the marker of FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, which rises as the ovaries slow down because it's trying to stimulate that. So that's something to look at. But in that phase, so the perimenopause is the change before the change. So looking in those years leading up to that last menstrual period, which can be as little as 1 year up to 10 years, consistently that the first marker is changes in the menstrual cycle. Often people might be having less frequent periods or more frequent periods. So by definition, perimenopause is marked by changes in the menstrual cycle.
mm,
And in that phase, rather than having the predictable rise and fall of estrogen at certain times of the month, there's this real hormonal chaos where you get quite highs sometimes of the estrogen, quite lows of the hormone of the estrogen. So
mm.
you can get these real, it's this hormonal chaos. And typically the main symptoms of menopause, when you think of particularly estrogen, would be hot flushes and night sweats. You would also get things like vaginal dryness and urinary symptoms can occur. So that might be that all of a sudden sex might be more painful, but you
Mm.
might not be interested in sex. That's another aspect.
Yeah.
Sometimes low libido can be one of the symptoms. Also, aches and pains, very commonly. You can get breast changes, breast pain. So when you're getting those highs of the estrogen, all of a sudden you're feeling like this young person again, where you're getting really sore breasts.
Yep.
And there can be other symptoms like headaches. There can be, I'm talking about the physical symptoms, first of all, migraine. There might also be a more worsening of premenstrual symptoms, mood changes, because we know estrogen actually is like an inbuilt natural antidepressant. It really makes our happy hormone serotonin hang around a bit more. And so those times of the month where you get the drop in the estrogen, you'll see that some people experience that low mood, and that's in direct relationship to that natural drop in estrogen. But at
Yeah.
menopause, when you're getting more of that, there can be bloating, weight gain could also be, and that creepy crawling feeling on your skin, which
Mm.
is like called formication after the Latin word for ants, formica.
Really?
Yes, yes. It's also Italian, formica. My background's Italian. And then, the other one that really people struggle with is the impact on their brain.
Yeah.
The brain fog, there's actually called menopausal brain fog, the concentration issues, going into a room, forgetting what you went in there. Because estrogen, we've got all these receptors in the brain that particularly love estrogen and has this very important role on cognition. And our brain will adjust, but people do struggle with that symptom as well.
Wow. So you've listed
A lot.
almost every symptom under the sun, which I think is important to know. And I think this is why, we're talking about it is because, we'll get into this, but like, how do we recognize that we're in this state? What can we start to do to support ourselves? Because there's
Yes,
many things that you could contribute or attribute to a thyroid issue or a gut
that's right.
issue or, any kind of other issue, an inflammatory
Mm,
issue, an autoimmune condition, and just a regular UTI. Like there's other things that you might be able to, I guess, justify it. So I
absolutely.
think it's about, you know, we'll kind of understand how people can really start to identify that they're in this
Mm,
space and what they can do. And mind you, we're trying to keep our, what we're here to really break it down for people, the real simple things that we can do for
yes.
people to support themselves.
So in that, so people often think that everything that's happening from the age of 40 onwards is to do with menopause. So sometimes a little checklist. So as you know, I'm the consultant naturopath at Jean Hales Women's
Mm,
Health, and they've got this little checklist, which is just really simple, brings it down. Like what they do at Jean Hales is just translate everything to really simple. So they get all the symptoms, and the checklist is called What's Bothering Me. And they've got 3 columns. This is, mild, is it a lot, or some of the times never. And it lists most of the symptoms that I've talked about. And that's a good way of thinking, oh, maybe it is menopause. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's life. Maybe it's,
yeah.
that I've got stress and my job
Yes.
sucks and I really don't like my partner. Yeah.
That'll do it too. And
Yeah.
I'm glad that you mentioned that because we can link that below the podcast for people to
Fabulous.
go straight to it because
Good.
a good checklist is, can make everything a lot easier. Um, Let's go into, I guess, because this is, I guess, more that microbiome type talk with
Mm,
menopause. Can we please start talking about the changes that are happening now that we understand what perimenopause and menopause is? We've
mm.
had plenty of different discussions about the microbiome on the podcast, but people may not realize that there are changes that occur pre, during, post, like that changes as well. So,
Yes,
can we please talk about that? What do we need
yes.
to know about our microbiome?
When you asked me a while ago to have a look at this, I started looking to see if there was any research. And so, what we do know is that before puberty, those assigned female at birth and those assigned male at birth have very similar type of diversity or the differences in the microbiome. After puberty, that changes. So, those who are female actually have a greater diversity of bacteria. So, more rich kind of group of and various type of microbiome. So and we know that, and so there's a suggestion that maybe that's to do with estrogen having an impact. No one really knows.
Mm.
Postmenopausally, so when you look at some of the research is suggesting that postmenopausally, that diversity changes so that the females resemble more of the male.
Mm.
And then they're kind of attributing that maybe to estrogen. But one of the research papers that was a little bit bigger and used different ways of assessing, while they saw that there were differences, they didn't see the differences attributed to necessarily whether the person was premenopausal or postmenopausal, but to do with the changes in diet, which I
Mm.
love because
Yeah,
I reckon that's the key.
it
It's the
is.
diet,
Yeah.
it's the things that people are doing that really might be impacting that diversity. So I was really pleased to see that.
And I love that. And I think this is where, I would say, honestly, all of the podcasts that we've spoken about that have any relation to, I guess, using food as medicine or the
Mm,
diet being an influence, it always comes back to spoiler alert, diversity and high fiber,
yes.
in the diet,
Yeah,
which we'll get into, we'll break it
I
down.
know. But
But
isn't that great?
it is.
Like it's just not sexy though, is it, Rachel? Like, you're not selling anything
Nah.
and you're not kind of trying to do a whole protocol that's going to sort of basically, do this and that. And like, so sometimes when I look at that, like people come in and they've got all this stuff, I'm thinking, am I doing the wrong thing? And then I kind of like, I really question it. All these people, their fancy Instagrams and all of these great things. And it's like, am I missing something? And then when I actually look at it and I think, no, this is complicating.
Yeah.
Sometimes these poor people coming in and they've been influenced so many ways and they're taking all of these powders and I spend half of my consultation stripping it back and saying,
Yeah.
probably shouldn't have that.
Yeah.
Not sure that that's going to be so good for your gut microbiome.
Yeah.
Don't know whether that's actually indicated.
Yeah.
And the people are confused.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, look, and you feel for them because even as practitioners, we've got this lens that we're looking at all that content,
Mm,
calling out the BS. But if you're in a place of, well, no one's helping me, I'm not getting the information I need, I'm going to try these things, you can completely understand
yes,
why they end up, purchasing the different products. But what,
yes,
to come back to it being simple dietary things.
mm,
And I think that's what people want to hear. And we know, and I especially myself working in that bloating and IBS, saying
mm,
eat more fiber for some people is basically
yes,
like putting a bomb in their gut. And, go back to different episodes and, we might need to discuss SIBO and different
mm,
dysbiosis. So there might need to be a bit of a process
yes,
before your body tolerates. But I guess what we're saying is that the end goal and the sustainable management strategy is going to look similar for actually many of the conditions that we talk about, whether it be
yes,
endo or menopause or even just keeping your microbiome healthy.
mm,
Chances are your practitioner, if they're good at what they do, is going to be saying high fiber, lots of color, diversity,
yes,
plant focused. Doesn't necessarily need to be vegan, but have a really strong presence of plants there.
yes.
And, most of you will be pretty good.
And that becomes confusing, like at this time where our muscle mass is dropping
Mm,
postmenopausally, and everyone's on the we need to be having more protein, which absolutely we do.
yeah,
But when you look at the protein from animal products, it's greater. Like it's easier to get the amount of protein in
yeah,
there, and so it's also tricky trying to get these people to have enough plant-based protein
yeah,
to meet their protein needs while these protein demands are increased to help with that muscle mass postmenopausally. So
yeah.
it can be confusing.
It is. And we'll definitely get into some strategies because that's something I
Mm,
think even I mean, I navigate in my house. I would be happy to eat
Yes.
a bit more of a vegetarian
Mm.
style. My partner still really loves his animal protein, which I do too. But,
Yes.
it's about,
Yeah.
the middle ground. And we've found ways to do it, which we'll probably share, as we
Yes.
talk about that even more.
Yes.
But let's stay on this idea of like that microbiome. So I guess, because what we're talking about is you mentioned that the diversity or the makeup of that
Mm.
microbiome potentially is more influenced by more that diet than the estrogen. But
Yes.
is there like what is the link between estrogen and the microbiome? And I also just wanted to throw in a word, the estrobolome.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. The estrobolome.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I was like
Estrobolome.
estro. I was like, maybe it's too early for me to be pronouncing it wrong. But there's people might be like, what in Harry Potter have they just said? Like,
Yes.
what
I
is that
know.
spell? Can we please talk about like that? What's happening with that estrogen microbiome, estrobolome?
Okay, there's about three different questions there. So first of all,
Sorry.
what we do know about it. So can I talk about what we know estrogen
Yes.
does, and
Yes.
also there's a little bit on what phytoestrogens do on the gut first,
Mm-hmm.
and then this very important estrobolome will break down. So
Yeah.
what we do know is estrogen has a very positive impact on the gut, in the sense that it tends to help with that gut integrity and the tight junctions. So like we often talk about leaky gut. So in theory, estrogen is protective
Mm.
against that, protective in the esophagus, also in the gut. And so also a particular phytoestrogen, because I love phytoestrogens as
Love
well.
them.
There's a phytoestrogen genistein which is found in soy, and it also has a protective function in terms of neutralizing some of the acid. It produces more bicarb in the duodenum, so in the small intestine,
Mm.
and so can help to prevent from those duodenal ulcers. So,
Mm.
using soy for those who tolerate it can also be beneficial. So it has this protective effect in terms of where we do it. So we've got estrogen receptor A, alpha receptors, and estrogen receptor beta. Alpha tend to be things like stimulating breast, helping the menstrual cycle, stimulate the endometrium, the lining. The beta are protective. The
Mm.
beta are more in the brain. The estrogen receptor beta are also in the gut. And I'm saying that because the soy isoflavones have a higher affinity for the beta one. We'll talk about that
Mm.
later. But this estrobolome, okay. So in our gut, so estrogen, we've got to break it down,
Yep.
and so let's talk particularly premenopausally. We break it down, it comes into the liver, some of it goes out in the bile, and then some of it gets in the liver, it throws through the liver and then into the bowel. And there are bacteria in the gut that have a particular enzyme called beta glucuronidase, which are a bit naughty premenopausally, in the sense that, here's some estrogen, let's grab it, let's change it, and make it back into a form that can be reuptaken. So
Mm.
basically, those bacteria are the estrobolome, and they take that estrogen, and rather than pooing it out, we call it this enterohepatic recycling. It goes back into the system.
Yep.
Now, many people out there, and including us, that are looking at premenopausal people who have got estrogen dependent conditions like endometriosis or perhaps estrogen dependent cancers, we don't want that to happen. We
Yep.
want to favor that estrogen getting out, because
Yep.
estrogen is not ideal for those patients.
Yep.
But interestingly, postmenopausally, some of
Mm.
the literature talks about that estrobolome and that recycling of the estrogen, because we still do produce estrogen, not so much not from the ovaries anymore postmenopausally, but from our fat cells, from the adrenal glands. That taking up of the estrogen and bringing it back into the system
Mm.
may actually be beneficial in that estrogen overall pool and the retention of estrogen.
Mm.
Except you mentioned maybe not so much if you've got postmenopausal breast cancer. In that case, you want to be working. So,
Yeah. Which, I mean, that's what you were saying is like, these estrogen driven or dependent cancers, probably not good, different conditions. But
mm,
you're right, where you're just like, well, wait a second, if we've got this, I guess, this declining estrogen level, and there is actually something that may be supporting a circulation aspect,
yes,
it's interesting to think that that actually could be somewhat useful at that period of time.
mm,
It's interesting when we talk about, this is why we don't want to sometimes always blanket our results
absolutely.
or our different things because it really is quite case dependent or where you're at in your life really even as an individual.
And it's such a target for so many things that we do in a premenopausal woman, get not to mention, the wellness space where they're looking, estrogen clearance all the time.
Mm.
But, really looking at this in the terms of, well, maybe it's different in a postmenopausal
Yeah.
female.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, it's funny when we're talking about estrogen clearance, I think this is probably more that pre-menopausal place as well.
Yes.
Like, people can get really bogged down on like this particular enzyme, for example, which is, yes, it's
Mm.
true, it does have a role, but then there's just also the basic things of, are you constipated? Like there's other things which,
Yes.
when we're talking about estrogen clearance, it doesn't have to be these protocols. It could just be as simple as, are you pooing properly?
Absolutely, yes. So that's you raise a good point, and I want to ask you about the
Yeah.
the, the enzymes, but particularly, yes, to encourage to stop that, what I call it a naughty bacteria
Yeah.
premenopausally. You don't want that to do that. High fiber diet, neutralizing the gut with there's evidence around cultured milk products, high fiber diet, low animal fat, and an apple a day.
Yeah.
Has some, I remember learning about an apple a day has an influence on it, and that brassica family, which is not going to be so great for some of the people who've got irritable bowel, that brassica, windy kind
Yeah.
of sort of family. But yes, we talked off air about measuring things, like, because you can measure the
Yeah.
activity.
Yeah. So from a gut testing perspective, so again, like when we're talking about the gut, it's never really about causation. So anything that we talk about, please don't think beta glucuronidase, I've got endo, or my menopause is going to be amazing if I've got high levels. This is just
Yeah.
about association, right? And it's always about interpreting these results in context of the person sitting in front of you. But if you're working with like great metagenomic stool testing companies, I'll name drop it, that we use all the time, Cobiome, they really are the bee's knees when it comes to testing. There's different markers which I might be looking at in the gut for my perimenopausal, menopausal patients that I'm taking into consideration. So the first thing I might be looking at is markers, and I'm going to, I guess, do more digestive markers and move into metabolites.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
digestive markers, I'm looking at if there are high numbers of oral species in their stool sample. So, the first thing I guess I need to explain about that is having lots of your oral species, literally species in your mouth, found in your stool isn't ideal. It's
No.
because we want our stomach acid to be adequate in
Mm.
killing that process. Because, I mean, think about if it's a yucky pathogen, we want that stomach to be a defense barrier for us. So if we see lots of oral species, and by lots, it's I think about four or more, you start to think, okay, maybe they have a stomach acid issue. Now,
Mm.
in relation to that demographic of the perimenopause, menopause, it's not necessarily female or AFAB specifics, more about the age that this comes into play, is that there's just more of a risk of, there's a higher tendency of, as we get older, we have lower stomach acid.
Yes.
And that then puts stress on your digestion, how you absorb nutrients. We're talking about that we want to be getting in all these fibers and things. And so if you've got,
Oh, yes.
bad digestion, you're going to be like, how on earth do I do this?
No, but I'm so glad you brought this up, because as well as I love bitters, I
Yeah.
absolutely love bitters. So I get excited about bitters. Three naturopaths went out for dinner 3 nights ago. We were thinking, so, what do we start? We're going to have an alcoholic beverage. We all have a bitter. And one of them took this one, it was called Suze, I think.
Mhm.
And she gave us a taste, because I was choosing another one. And because this is to prepare your
Yeah.
digestion, right? And really tasted like I was drinking gentian straight out of it. Like, it was really, I mean, whoa, that's very medicinal. So I'm so glad we're going to be talking about bitters.
Yeah, I mean, it's again totally nerdy out here for people that if you're patients of Sandra or mine, or if you're patient of another naturopath and have been given bitters, you're going to know that sensation of like,
It's making me
oh,
salivate even just
yeah,
talking about it, because that's how it
exactly.
works.
Exactly. So it's all about this like real digestion stimulation. So those bitters, again, we can talk about how they get implemented in the diet. You
Mm.
don't always have to have a nice alcoholic beverage before your meal. In fact,
Sorry.
please don't. But it's good to know that, because those alcoholic beverages, they are historically medicinal,
They
right? Like,
are aperitif if they
yeah,
prepare the digestion. All of them have got that kind of. And look, I'm not going to say to do it, but like, if I've
yeah,
got patients in front of me who are drinking 2 glasses of wine a night, anyway, I'm just saying, look, you know what? Why don't, and I have done this before
yeah,
where they've swapped them. Why don't you just have one of these, a bitter and with some
yeah,
soda? It means that they have a lower intake of alcohol.
yeah.
It's actually doing their impact on their digestion, and they're less likely to drink the rest of the bottle of wine.
And you're meeting people where they're at, which is exactly what we want as well,
Yeah,
is like, how do we
yeah.
start making sustainable changes? Cold turkey isn't always a thing for
No.
people. So like, what can we do to kind of start to kind of move the needle? So
Mm,
that's kind of, so that
mm,
hydrochloric acid, or at least that stomach
yes.
health is one thing we're looking at. The other thing that we could be looking at is lower pancreatic elastase. So our
Mm,
pancreas, is a massive organ for blood glucose regulation, but also enzyme output for our digestion. And there was a study that showed that, even with healthy controls or healthy patients, and healthy meaning that they didn't have any GI issues, they hadn't had surgery, gastrointestinal surgery, they didn't have diabetes, which are factors that can decrease pancreatic elastase. Even when they were about 60 years old, 21% of them had pancreatic exocrine insufficiency. So an
yes.
output less than 200 of the measuring unit that they use. So it is something that over time, as you age, it's a risk factor that digestive output decreases, and you're more likely to have that issue when you have gut issues, if you have diabetes. So again, we're
Yes.
talking about, trying to get in these fibers, and if you can't digest it,
Yeah,
it's,
absolutely.
need to
Had a
support that.
student, yeah, had a student in the student clinic last night, and the student really wanted to do bitters and take out, just modify the diet a bit. And then she said, I want to do gut integrity. And said, no, how do you know just working on that top bit isn't going to solve his problem? I said, can we hold off on that? It was actually really interesting. Like they all
Yeah.
want to do, oh, it's all gut, leaky gut.
Yep.
It's like actually get this cephalic phase working,
Yep.
the upper part. Can I ask you a question? So with that pancreatic insufficiency,
Yep.
will it respond to bitters, or do you feel like you need to use digestive enzymes and sometimes the pharmaceutical ones, the grade, that amount?
It depends on the person. I've definitely had bitters being adequate. In terms of time frame, it can be a sense of how long's a piece of string.
Yes.
Also, the risk factors, as to why it's there. If it's they don't have any of those additional gut issues, or they haven't had surgeries or things like that, they can, in my experience, they respond quite well to bitters.
Yes.
Sometimes if they're digestive, more so their symptoms, if they're just so debilitating with every meal, we're going to enzymes, and that could be more naturopathic supplement.
Yeah.
And if they're super, super low, we pretty much
Yeah.
refer them straight away. But
Yeah.
as even a golden rule as naturopaths, when we see low
Mm,
pancreatic elastase,
mm.
we do want to refer it back to the GP, because we can't just say, oh, it's
Absolutely.
just getting older. Like we need
Yeah.
to make sure
Could
there's
be.
not, celiac disease, diabetes,
Yeah.
all these other things. So it kind of depends, but yeah, for those that don't have, I guess, a quote unquote less severe kind of
Mm,
pancreatic elastase, those bitters and naturopathic enzyme supplements
mm.
tend to do well. And I do prefer bitters because it's got that
Yeah.
whole, it's stimulating more than
Yes.
just the pancreas,
Yeah.
or substituting for that.
So, we always used to think that we had to taste the bitter for it to register. I've listened to Professor Kerry Bone recently, who says that we don't actually need to be tasting them anymore to have the action. So that's kind of good for people who are averse to that sort of taste, I guess.
Definitely.
And yeah, look, it's also the bitters become an issue when so many patients that come in are on a PPI, or they're on medication to lower their stomach acid, and it's like, what do we do there?
Yeah, I still think there's some bitters that you can use, but gentian you tend to caution against, but even ginger, and that's where sometimes the food is
Mm,
medicine bitters, which
yeah.
we've been kind of, I guess our tongues have adapted to not have bitter food, and the food has
Mm,
been, I think about rocket, it's kind of been, I don't know if bread's the right word, but it's been kind of farmed to be probably less bitter than what it traditionally would be. Or
yeah.
if you were to go pick it wild in the hills
Yeah.
of
The
Italy or
peppery,
something.
real peppery
Yeah.
wild. Yeah.
So there's our food isn't as bitter as what it is historically, but there are still definitely bitter foods that we
Mm,
can get in the diet. So even things like dill, ginger, I know I mentioned rocket, even coffee, which you got to be careful when
yes.
there's a refluxy person there. But like there are bitter foods that we can start getting in. So I'd probably be starting with those if they're on a PPI, maybe looking at, gentle bitters.
Yes.
And yeah, obviously educating people about, if you get symptoms of, pull back, and making sure they're having it with food.
I love that you think you're talking about ginger and dill as being bitters as well. I mean, I love using dill,
Mm.
particularly I do a nice little dill pesto to put on top of fish. But my favourite bitters, like, well, I'm Italian, so I grew up with bitters. It's in my, it's really like my dad would always be growing these bitter green vegetables. And my favourite, and we're excited because we're having it tonight as
Yeah.
part of our meal, is radicchio, the purple
Yes.
one. I love it. Oh, I can't, when I'm washing it, I just have to eat it. I can't wait. And my very favourite is radicchio with whitloff, so the little mini endive. And
Yes.
I just get like, I don't know, get a group of a group of us, we get together, and it's like, it's very exciting having these bitters. So, and look, and dandelion root, because it's also,
Yeah.
what about dandelion root as a coffee substitute as well? You know,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
very not very, very 80s, 90s naturopathic sort of stuff, but beautiful.
Exactly. So there's different options out there. So all of these things, you're probably like, oh my God, I'm taking fiber bitters. But like again, we're talking about many of these things we're mentioning a diet. And most of them, again, it's about more plants, more diversity, and
Yes.
just kind of branching out of maybe our 20 foods that we go to all the time. It's about, picking up the endive or the whitloff or the
Yes.
radicchio or those types of things.
So I do recipes on the Jean Hales Kitchen, and
Mm.
there is a recipe. So they usually have a health message. So it's basically, and so there's one called Whitloff Mukamaki, which is, the soybeans in there, and something else, radish. And so in there, it's this really beautiful way of using the whitloff, and it's got the little soybeans in it. And the little spiel talks a little bit about dietary bitters as well. So maybe
Yeah.
we can link that kind of recipe as well.
Definitely the recipes,
Yeah.
even just the recipe. I mean, like you're making recipes for, a lot of these women's health issues and, so,
Yes.
the bitters, but also I know that is there still the juicy vagina muffins on there,
Yeah,
which
we're going to talk about that now.
well, actually, I wanted to finish off. I did want to finish off on just a couple of other markers that I'm looking
Oh,
at.
yeah, good, because I've got more questions for you about that.
Cool. Who's interviewing who? So, but the other ones that I'm looking at are, I guess, again, very much about more association rather than
Yes.
causation, but branched chain amino acids, which some of our gut
Yes.
microbes can produce. They can be, and again, this is about the person sitting in front. So just because you have high levels or high capacity to produce this doesn't also mean that these things will happen to you, but they're linked to systemic inflammation and linked with type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, and obesity, because we know that, again, as we age, more of these cardiometabolic issues we're at an increased risk of for many different reasons. So I'm just kind of making sure that there's not
Mm.
a gut factor, contributing to that.
Absolutely. And can I look, when they've looked at that, it's mainly not much research. Some of it, they take the ovaries out of mice, and they notice that these sort of things happen, the
Yeah.
cardiometabolic influence, because of the diversity, sometimes of the diversity of the microbiome. And yeah, even, other things that you'll see postmenopausally. So I love that you're looking at the markers to look at that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. There's two more, which again are linked to these kind of more chronic kind of conditions is, well, hexa LPS, which is like an inflammatory compound that can come from certain types of bacteria. It is seen in patients that have more issues with obesity, type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and even Alzheimer's. Again, these are associations and what they're seeing, not causations. And then high trimethylamine N oxide, which is also associated with more cardiovascular events, type 2 diabetes, obesity, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So
Mm.
also just how that patient's presenting, their family history, we're thinking about what kind of, and really we address these mostly through dietary interventions. So
Yeah, look,
yeah,
it's so important, because you raise a really good point. Like, most of these people come in and they're worried about menopause, and they're worried about their brain. Understand,
yeah,
but they're worried about what's happening now and then. Oh, I need to stop this happening. But then they're not so much worried about the next 30 to 40 years in terms of postmenopausally. They're at an increased risk of cardiometabolic conditions like diabetes, type 2 diabetes. What used to be called now non-alcoholic fatty liver has changed the name, because we don't like to call the liver fat. So
yep,
it's now has this big name, metabolic associated steatic liver disease, so MASLD instead of NAFLD. So, but I just put fatty liver in italics.
sure.
And cardiovascular disease, as
Yeah.
well as Alzheimer's. The leading cause of death in Australia for
Mm,
females is dementia, including Alzheimer's, followed by cardiovascular disease. So
yeah,
if there's all this information about this microbiome
yeah,
possibly having an impact on these risk factors for whatever, I don't think we know exactly
Yeah.
what's happening yet, but we know that it's having an impact not only on cardiovascular, but perhaps on the bone.
Yeah.
The things that we can do to make that microbiome as healthy as possible for prevention, ideally, yes.
Absolutely. So lots of information there. We're always about prevention. And like you said,
Mm,
if there are links that we can see in our testing in the microbiome that we can
yes.
start to support people and from a preventative place, fantastic.
Can I just ask one? When I
Yeah.
was looking at the literature, they talked about, and we talked about this off air in terms of they're listing the types of
Yeah.
bacteria and microbes that they see that change, increasing this,
Yeah.
decreasing that postmenopausally and menopausally and premenopausally. You wouldn't be looking at the numbers so much more than the
Well,
markers.
yeah, so I guess like sometimes you can get, I guess, a bit too reductionist with certain
Yes.
species. And don't get me wrong, there are some, certain species that you're like, that's a problem or that's an indicator of. But just to take a step back, and again, because it's a community, so we wanted to be thinking about
Mm,
how is it behaving as a community. So we're definitely looking at diversity. So diversity in that richness being, I guess, the number, and
yes.
diversity being how evenly they're spread. So as I guess a bit of a benchmarks I set for my patients as adults, because less than 18, you know, years old, it's a little bit different, our microbiomes then, but as adults, we're wanting to have a microbiome richness of 200 or more species.
Yes.
And it tends to be, and you can still have some of these markers I mentioned when you have a rich microbiome, but it tends to be the less diverse microbiomes have more of these problems because I'll get into that later. But the other
Mm,
thing is that with that richness, we want an even spread of the microbes that you have there. So we don't want one certain microbe taking up 20% of the microbiome. We
mm,
want lots of different species taking up really small amounts, so we don't have like one big bully in there. Now, when we're talking about, I guess, why I like looking at more the metabolites rather than the specific species is because each species has the capacity to make different byproducts.
mm.
So you might have a Bacteroides uniformis or something. I've just picked something off the top of my head, and that might make beta glucuronidase, but it also might make, and I'm making this up because I can't remember off the top of my head, but it also might make something beneficial like propionate, or it might make butyrate as well. So these species have the capacity to make quote unquote good and quote unquote bad things. What often is the driver of that is what we're eating in our diet, because what we eat, our bugs eat. And blanket and general rule is that if it's a high fiber diet that's diverse, your bugs will opt for those more beneficial byproducts. If it tends to be more fat or protein, or it's more so the mucus that they eat. And again, they eat mucus in our gut when there's not fiber there. So if it's more mucus or mucin and protein fed microbes, they will likely be making these non-beneficial byproducts. So again, it comes back to what's the diet like will
Mm.
dictate how your microbes work, which will then influence the things that they make.
Aren't they clever? They want to be good.
They really
They
do.
want to be good.
And they will eat what they need to survive. If they're like, if there's not fiber there, I'm going to eat the mucin on the lining of
Yes.
your gut and impact and give you a more permeable and leaky gut because I haven't been given the fiber I want and I still need to live, so I'm going to eat this mucin here. Or, all right, you can have a protein shake breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but I will be eating that protein and I will be making beta glucuronidase instead of another beneficial product because I don't have the fiber to make what I need to make. So,
Yes.
again, our bugs are actually very flexible, but they
Mm.
are like what they eat is really determined by what we give them. So the power is, what we put in our mouths.
That's a really it's like being a good parent, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we have to parent our little gut bugs up
That's
because,
right.
would be screwed without them. So
Yes.
I really obviously want to get to linseeds,
Yes.
phytoestrogens,
Yep.
serms. We hear phytoestrogens and serms as bad or scary things. I think there's a little
Yes.
bit more education around it, but there's still a little bit of misinformation. Can you please
Absolutely.
explain what they are?
Yes. So phytoestrogens, plant estrogens, they're naturally found in certain plants, high amounts. There's different groups of them. So the isoflavones, particularly in soy, also some plants, like some medicinal plants like red clover. You also get other classes like lignans that are particularly in linseeds, there's coumestrins as well, but you'll also find phytoestrogens generally in legumes and certain whole grains, so and seeds. But the richest ones are in the soy particularly. But legumes, seeds, grains, also high in fiber, aren't they?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So there's been a lot of misinformation, and it's one of my bugbears about people kind of talking about phytoestrogens as being like problematic and endocrine disruptors. And look, strictly they do actually work on strictly they might be an endocrine disruptor, but not in a bad way. So what they do is they look chemically, structurally similar to our own body's estrogen. So they have the ability to come in and hook on to estrogen receptors. So where our hormones in our body will work, they've got to hook on to little receptors. So if you think about like a keyhole, and the estrogen being the key, comes in, hooks on, does its thing. So phytoestrogens have a similar type of key cut. And so they'll come in and hook on and do one of two things. So they might actually just occupy the space because they're much weaker estrogen, and then have a kind of an anti-estrogen effect in a place where you might premenopausally have an overall higher estrogen status. Postmenopausally, they come in with their weak action. They might actually offer some type of benefit. But when I talk about the receptors, we do need to talk about alpha and beta. So alpha, we talked about all the stimulating sort of processes that estrogen will have. The beta ones dampen down that process. They kind of don't have that stimulating effect on the breast. They're very good for the brain. They're very good for the bone. And so the phytoestrogens particularly, and my main focus I talk about is with soy, have a higher affinity for those beta ones. And so that's why they're called a selective estrogen receptor modulator. So they are quite, they selectively choose the beta receptors. And thankfully, people think, I can't take phytoestrogens, they're going to cause cancer, they're going to upset everything. This year, thankfully, I think it's this year, the Cancer Council of Australia have now put out their statement in terms of, while there is some evidence that these can be beneficial in preventing cancer, like particularly some of the data talks about young females having it before puberty, it might decrease. So they're not going to say that. They say there's not enough evidence to use it as a prevention, but there is no reason why patients should be not having them in terms of increasing their risk of cancer. And there is no reason why patients who have had breast cancer need to stop taking phytoestrogens in their diet.
Yeah.
And then there are other aspects. I think I might have showed you that, the American Cancer Association and Research Center, they actually have some evidence where it can be beneficial for other cancers as well. So, stop demonizing these phytoestrogens, but we've got to keep it real. So we've really got to keep it real. Soybeans, whole bean soy milk, tofu, tempeh, not highly processed soy that's found in some of these fake meats. And I'm not a big fan of soy supplements. Because we don't know how they work, with the exception of soy germ, which we weren't able to get for a long time, and now we can get it. So soy germ is very similar to the way you get it in the diet, but I'm a big fan of trying to get it in the diet.
I love that because like the soy fear is still it's still hanging around, and to have the Cancer Council and to have these people come out and kind of really try to, make a stance on it, or at least try to clear that confusion. Again, they can't always say, yes, it's absolutely positive, but they can at least say, look, it's not as bad as what we thought it was. And I think that's the thing that people want to hear, because I immediately always think to the Japanese culture. And I know that there is so much more than the Japanese culture does than just eat soy, which would be, I guess, why they have such long life expectancy and such good health outcomes. They've got lots of great things that they do as a society, but they eat a ton of soy, generally speaking, and they've got really low cancer rates. They've got low chronic disease issues. Again, very blanket statement, I'm saying it. So I think as an example, we can kind of see that there are cultures that thrive, that have soy as a big part of their diet.
Two things I want to say about that. They've looked at the microbiome of octogenarians and people who live a long time.
Yes.
And the
people who live to 100 plus.
Plus. And their microbiomes are different. They're more diverse.
Yeah.
And the other part of that is, in terms of coming on board with, I was asked this year, part of the Australasian Menopause Society, to update their their complementary medicine page, and I was really clear on making sure that the information about soy, it's all very evidence-based, as it has to be with a
Yeah.
society like that, is up to date now, with it being, safe to use.
I love that. So
Mm.
I feel like people who are going to listen to the answer to this question know what you're going to say, but from a food perspective,
Mm.
for people that are in that perimenopause,
Mm.
menopausal state, that are looking at not only maybe those menopausal classic symptoms, but even I guess as a prevention of some of those cardiometabolic uh, increased risk kind of factors that they're looking at and trying to
Mm.
prevent those. What are you looking at in terms of diet? What type of diet are you generally suggesting to these people? Are there any specifics that you're doing? Are there any things that you're saying, don't follow this diet? Like, what are your recommendations?
Oh, my mind's spinning now. We do also need to talk about equal producers and non-equal producers. That sounds right.
Let's do that first. Let's do
Let's
that
do that
first.
first. Okay. In terms of, okay. All right. So equal, so that you get there's phytoestrogens in soy,
Yep.
and they are broken down. They can be converted to equal, which is a more potent phytoestrogen. This happens in the gut. There's bacteria in the gut. You either have it or you don't.
Hmm.
50 to 60% of the Asian culture have, females and males have that bacteria that can convert it. Only about 20 to 30% of Caucasians have the ability to convert the estrogen, phytoestrogen from soy to the more potent equal. So they're the equal
Mm.
producers. They're the people who are more likely to get benefit from the soy for maybe helping with hot flushes. Probably, the data suggests, with the brain health. And Jason Horlick, who's a colleague of ours, well respected in this field, every year when I saw him, I would ask him, so Jason, any evidence that we can, make ourselves be equal producers or not? Any evidence that we can take a probiotic? I think he got sick of me asking him. So last year at the National Herbalist Summit, which I couldn't attend for family reasons, but he actually answered the question, and he actually did a talk on whether you could actually influence your ability to produce this equal. The long and short of it was having, I think that there was something about kiwi fruit, a couple of kiwi fruits being useful, having a high fiber, high polyphenol diet, actually eating organic soy would actually be useful. And I can't remember, I think there was another thing, but anyway, look, you're either an equal producer or not,
Yeah.
maybe a higher fiber polyphenol diet and a couple of kiwis, if you're not sort of,
Yeah.
if you can tolerate them, might be useful.
You know what? That's also told us that the squeaky wheel does get the oil. So we really
Yeah.
love your determination to get an answer for that. So thanks, Sandra. Keep doing good.
Thanks.
So, I mean, but Kiwis as well. As soon as you said that, I thought, oh, my constipated people. Hello.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
great
that's
for
right.
that. So there's always these
Yeah.
really wonderful crossovers when we're talking about fiber. So
Yes.
yeah.
So, in terms of the diet for prevention, so look, the biggest evidence that we have around prevention of, when I talk about cardiovascular, I'm also going to talk about brain because it's very
Yeah.
similar,
Yeah.
is the Mediterranean diet,
Yeah.
which is predominantly plant based, very colourful. So I will often talk about that. I'm just trying to think. There's lots of good. I mean, when I kind of use the portfolio diet, which
Yeah.
is a diet the Canadian researchers used to lower cholesterol, which is again very plant based
Yeah.
as well, and they do have a high soy protein in that, and they
Yeah.
do, include nuts.
Yeah.
So what we do know is, about 80 to 90% of cardiovascular disease is preventable by diet
Mm.
and exercise. Don't smoke, be active, having a diet that's kind of a Mediterranean sort of diet. I feel like I'm missing something really. I said don't smoke. When we look at brain stuff, it's things like, your hearing, you're looking at teeth. There's so many factors.
Mm.
Community, like looking at preventing depression, community contact, all of
Yeah.
that sort of thing. It's really multifactorial, but I'm
It
not
is.
sure I've answered your question so well. Maybe we'll
I
go
mean,
into some
I do
specifics.
feel like, throughout this, we probably couldn't have said the word fiber more. Like we've been
Yeah,
very pro fiber and pro
yeah,
diversity. So I think, that Mediterranean as a guideline also fits actually many of the markers like your BCAAs and your trimethylamine that I mentioned. Also, they ask for a Mediterranean diet and products like rye, which is again those nice whole grains
yes,
to reduce those. So
absolutely.
again, there's crossover with the diet.
When people think about the Mediterranean, like we were a bit, what is the Mediterranean diet?
Yeah,
It's not pizza and pasta. And so there was a
if only.
fabulous study that was done here a few years ago where some predominantly Melbourne dietitians, and I'll give you the link to it,
Yep.
translated what does the Mediterranean diet look like in an Australian diet. And so one of the recipes that I have on Gene Howell's called the Bounty Bowl, it's
Mm-hmm.
got the 12 components and it breaks it down. This is, you have legumes 2 to 3 times a week. You have olive oil, blah, blah, blah. Have fruit, as like basically it'll say, have predominantly blah, blah, blah. So there's these 12 points that
Mm.
just break it down into like, oh, that's easy.
Yeah.
Like that's easy to remember.
Yeah.
But when I'm looking at the fiber, particularly if I'm doing that cardiometabolic
Mm.
sort of prevention, I do, and looking at the portfolio diet, the two fibers that they talked about a lot were oats and barley. We don't use barley a lot in this
Yeah,
country.
not really.
And look, you can't have it if you're gluten-free, but like barley, again, as one of the key things, so they used psyllium, which we'll
Mm-hmm.
talk about.
Yep.
So psyllium, and they used oats and barley as their main fibers, and alternating days of eggplant and okra in the original
Mm.
research as the fiber. And so, I get people to use barley as a grain, like, I
Yep.
do sort of things like salads that have got it. I do a minestrone soup that's got soybeans and barley instead of the pasta and
Yep.
the other beans. And look, even if people are having their protein smoothie for breakfast because they're trying to get the protein, put in some oats, whiz it up, and I always get them to put linseeds in, like
Yep.
really put the fiber in. I mean,
Yep.
is that going to really try and sometimes I get them to blend up silken tofu instead of yogurt, like in their smoothie. So all these little swaps that you can do if you're trying
Yeah.
to, what am I trying to achieve? Am
Yeah.
I trying to get more phytoestrogens? I've got to balance up the fiber.
Yeah, I definitely will be linking the Gene House. It sounds like there's just so many recipes on there that people can use. But I think what you said was really good. And this is where like the education comes in, because what comes naturally to you and I, Sandra, as to how we modify our food, people would not think about blending tofu in their smoothies. But what we're saying is that you can't, like, you can have your protein smoothie, because I mean, I have a protein powder in my smoothie, but I have my ground linseeds and flax seeds and my spinach, and I might have some zucchini in there. And I've got my berries in there, and it's like
Yes.
a full meal,
Yes.
just making sure I get the protein. And I don't have that every day, but it's on high rotation, but I'm making sure that there's those fiber additions to it. And what you said about, barley and how you can use that, and eggplant, like these are things where, again, people don't really look at eggplant and think, what a magical
I
food
know.
that
It seems
is.
like a lot of work. I mean, it's great. And there are different ways you can do it. Like I think one of my favorite recipes of it, I think it's a Greek, they call it some sort of Greek salad, where you just kind of cut it in half, prick holes in it. Then once it's cooked, doesn't take long, maybe 40 minutes, scoop it out and put it in a blender with parsley, olive oil, a lemon juice, and some, if you want to, you can put a little bit of feta in it. It becomes this kind of dip.
Like it's a baba ganoush type thing.
It kind of, my
Yeah.
family of origin, I always have to make it for parties. And like a couple of my brother-in-laws just hoe into it. Super simple. You cut the eggplant in half.
Yeah.
And with the Gene Health Kitchen, I'm all about simple things. You
Yeah.
don't need you need really, you can have a hand beater,
Yeah.
pestle and mortar, a little seed grinder, and if you've got something that'll whiz things around, doesn't have
Yeah.
to be fancy.
Yeah. You don't
But
need a
yeah.
Thermomix.
No, that's why I didn't want to mention that. But yeah,
Yeah. I mean, we love a Thermomix, but not everyone has one, right?
look, lucky if you've got it, but not everyone can. And so I
Yeah.
need to make it accessible for people. So one of
Exactly.
my favorite things is this little seed and spice grinder, which brings me like linseeds. Love
Yep.
them. Can I talk about those now?
Sandra, I would be sad if you didn't. Please talk about them.
Okay. So what you do, you can grind up to 2 weeks supply. So you get this little spice grinder, put them in the fridge in like a glass jar, airtight. So glass, not plastic. We don't want
Yep.
any leaching of the plastic, glass, and also airtight because we don't want it to oxidize. So about 2 weeks supply, and then it's ready to go. More
Yep.
than that, the oils are going to start to go off. If you can do that more frequently, great, but people are time poor.
Yep.
Sometimes when I grind them, I put a few cardamom pods in
Oh,
just to
yep.
give them a bit of a cardamomy taste.
Yeah,
I've got
nice.
a recipe on the Gene Hales one where it's the breakfast brain topper, where we mix it with cinnamon,
Yep.
and that's actually really yummy. And so linseeds, look, sometimes I just do that and nothing else. I say, look, just have 2 dessert spoons of linseeds a day.
Yep.
Watch what happens to your poo.
Yep.
You're going to use less toilet paper because it just forms it really
Yep.
nicely. They're rich in omega-3s, which are plant-based, and there's some evidence that for females, the plant-based omega-3s are even more beneficial than the omega-3s that we find in fish.
Mm.
So there was a Cochrane review that said, oh, maybe fish oils aren't really beneficial for females. Maybe you should, there's no evidence really about, no good evidence about taking fish oils. But if you have 2 grams of the plant-based ones, it might be beneficial, particularly with things like stroke prevention. So like 2 dessert spoons of linseeds exceeds that.
Yeah.
So we also find them in chia, also high in fiber. Also find them in hemp seeds. I reckon one of the best bangs for your buck
Yeah.
because protein, yummy, can disguise it. And walnuts.
Yes.
Another one of my, and fresh, not out of the supermarket packet. You've got to get them and crush them yourself, really.
Yeah.
So they're fresh.
Yeah, that's important for people. I guess that oxidization of, and it's not to give
Yeah.
people another step to do, but it's like if you go into the effort to have the ground product, if you can
Yeah.
just kind of buy it whole, give it a quick blend at home and fridge
Yes.
it, you're going to get more out of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the fiber, the omega-3s, the phytoestrogens. So there was a study done by some clinicians at Gene Hales years ago, late 90s, that they used 2 dessert spoons of linseeds, which is 25 grams. They used soy and they used some other things, and it plumped up the vaginal cells. So, vaginal dryness becomes an issue. We get this shrinking of the tissue. And so I have been prescribing this for over 20 years, and I can tell you that people come back and say it does make a difference. It will do
Yeah.
no harm
Yeah.
in terms of these 2 dessert spoons of linseeds. And yes, I'd have created a recipe that in-house is called the juicy vagina muffins. We
Yes.
don't call them the juicy vagina muffins, and don't search for juicy vagina muffins, or something else is going to come up. But they're
Oh,
the
yeah.
linseed date and but they're gluten-free, where the linseed forms the flour of these muffins that
Yeah.
are kind of a bit like a sticky date pudding. So they're a bit on the sweeter side, but I really like to have them straight out of the oven. I take the top out like back in the day, you might be too young for this, with
Oh,
the fairy
no,
cakes.
yeah.
You fill it with the yogurt, like a good yogurt, and then you cut it a little bit out and you make a butterfly cake and then
Yes.
some walnuts on top. So, it's stopping the blood sugar spike quite so much.
Yep.
But there are the linseeds in it, but yet delicious. Mate, look, really one of my top 5 foods for females.
And I think anybody who has ever been lectured by you knows you, like Sandra Linseeds and her juicy vagina muffin. Again, not officially called that, but
Yes.
like it is known industry wide that
Yes.
is, I mean, that's your legacy, I think.
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty good legacy because it really has, like you said, it's always like it's a medicinal dessert, really, or it's a
Yes.
medicinal kind of sweet treat, which, it's always good to say to people, here, have a delicious muffin instead of have some bitters, which we've been promoting as well.
Yes, I
So
know.
again, on
But
the Gene
look,
House, we'll have those
yeah.
recipes.
But if you don't want to have the linseeds, putting them into the smoothie,
Yeah.
sprinkling them on top of the cereal, they're not the sort of seeds, unfortunately, that you have on your salad, like
Yeah.
sunflower and pepitas, which my other 2 favorite, I
Yeah.
think, for this cohort, for everyone generally in terms of fiber. But I have been known to make a dukkha out of it.
Mhm.
And I don't like soaking it in my overnight stuff, except for chia puddings. They go
Yeah.
really well, like in a chia pudding.
Yeah.
But in an overnight oats, I like to sprinkle it on top the next day rather than you do. If you do put it in an overnight thing, you really need to make sure you're putting plenty of liquid, more
Yeah,
of
because
the
it
yogurt,
soaks up.
because it will absorb. That's what it does. Yeah.
A question, I think I know the answer to this, but are you only ever suggesting people have them ground to get the most out of, or is there like, because with the seeds, many like they just kind of pass through. Do you kind of miss
Yeah,
some of
they
the
do.
benefit if they're not ground?
Yes,
Yeah,
you do have to break the outer casing to
yeah,
actually release the goodness and release the phytoestrogen.
there
So
you go.
otherwise, they do kind of go through you. I think there's a couple of recipes where they're whole. But otherwise, ideally ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's good for people to, I guess, be
Mm.
very clear that it's the ground that we want. So, all right, so I've got final 2 questions. So
Yeah.
what would be for, again, this demographic of menopause, perimenopause, what would be one simple tip that you would get someone to be doing today to help with their health? And then the last question is, of all your experience and wisdom and knowledge, what would your number one piece of advice be for someone navigating this space of perimenopause and menopause? So a today tip and a number one, I guess,
I think I've
tip.
answered the today tip, haven't I? With the 2 dessert spoons of linseed, 25 grams of linseed a day.
I think so.
And it's cheap. I do
Yeah,
say, look, do the food test. Just do it.
yeah,
2 dessert spoons, just try to add that in, get them whole. So linseeds and flax seeds are the same things. Yeah,
yeah.
okay. And look, I think, look, it's a good question. I think about what to do if you're navigating this space is just get the right information. And that's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Look, I work for Jean Hales. I'm the consultant naturopath. They've got really sensible information. If you look there first to think, okay, they're not missing out on anything. And then, like, maybe you can look at other information as well, but just kind of, oh, Rachel, that's a hard one. I just think kind of be kind to yourself. Everybody is different. I have people who just sail through it and then, have
Mm.
no symptoms or in that 20%. And there are other people that really struggle with a whole range of symptoms. And
Yeah.
you've got to look at what's happening. A lot of these people are got big stressful jobs. We've got the cost of living that's really an
Yeah.
issue. They're sandwich parenting. They've got young people and trying to look after their
Yeah.
family. I think just actually taking the time to sort of maybe just do that little checklist first
Yeah.
and then go from there.
Yeah. I feel like though, from what we were saying, and I definitely don't want to put words in your mouth, but I feel like from where we started to where we are now, at the beginning, we were talking about the confusion of a lot of people
Mm.
facing. So for me, anyway, when I think about gut and people, it's always about if you don't have the right information with the people you're working with, look elsewhere, which again, that can be
Yes,
hard. But I think what you'd mentioned, because I'd asked you this in I guess a bit of a form before, you were talking about like qualified help. So I guess just making sure maybe it's
yes.
not influencers, because
Influencers. You've got a pretty
yeah,
face and well known, and here, take my product. Like,
yeah.
doesn't, yeah. Mm,
But I think even if because it can be hard to be like, what is your one piece of advice? Look, you've given much more than just a single piece of advice. So people take what you want from
yes,
the podcast. There's plenty to
yeah.
choose from. Sandra, this has been an incredible chat. I have loved talking about obviously linseed, the estrobolome, everything gut, everything menopause. I hope anybody and everybody listening to this, if they're in it or nearing it in that phase of their life, that they're kind of feeling a little bit more calm about it. And if people wanted to learn from you or work with you, how do they do that? Because we'll put your details in the show notes.
Okay, I will. I will put that in. Yes. So look,
Yeah,
I do see patients face to face. I'm in at Fairfield, and I also work in the CBD at Jean Hales on a Thursday morning. We
yeah,
can put the details in.
great.
But can I also say as a PS, because you're the gut expert, we're talking about adding all these fibers and things in. They
Yeah,
need to go slowly if they're,
yeah,
don't, yeah.
yes, yeah.
Can you finish off with a little PS about, like, we're saying all these things that could potentially, oh my goodness, I'm feeling so
Yeah.
bloated. So what would your bit of advice be about some of the things that we talked about?
Yeah, that's probably a good, I guess,
Finish
say
off.
is a good thing to end on. But if you are someone who's extremely fiber sensitive and fiber reactive, first thing you need to know is like things can change. It's just at the moment your gut's in a place where it's not coping. So my first thing would be is to seek qualified help about that. But know that if it's IBS or SIBO, that it's just this isn't your forever. It's just your gut's asking for help. And same thing, you want qualified people that you're working with, not the influencers spruiking their products. If you're someone that's not quite sure on their how they tolerate fiber, and I think this would even go for anybody who's introducing foods, is we want to start slowly. So this could be, and by slowly, it is honestly also an individual thing. So for some people, when we're introducing new foods, it could be as small as like a teaspoon of a food every
Yes.
second day. I'm definitely not saying if you're not a legume or a lentil eater that you go and have half a tin of lentils.
No.
You know, it literally could be a
A
teaspoon
couple
every
of
now and then.
teaspoons.
Yeah.
I definitely do that with psyllium, 1 to 2 teaspoons,
Yes.
really slowly.
So yeah, I think like go slow if you're trying to, if you're trying to diversify and you think that you're okay with fiber. And like just so you know that you're not crazy, anyone, best gut or not, if you were to throw a bunch of new food in their gut that they haven't had before, their gut's going to react because it's going to get
Mm-hmm.
pretty excited. So it's going to happen to the best of us. So go slow. If you're someone that's like, I can't tolerate any fiber, reach out for help because a fiber free diet or a low fiber diet, as we've said in this podcast and many others, is never what we're aiming for. In fact, it's the opposite. And we've spoken about all the different ways that fiber can help. So it's important to kind of, I guess, be working with the right people to make that possible for you, which it is. I work with people that do that all the time. So it's possible. So I guess thank you for interviewing me, Sandra, on that last question.
I was your teacher, Rachel. I've got to
I know,
admit.
I know, I know. You did, yeah, I guess, yeah, old habits die hard.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. It was so good. I loved learning from you as well, Rachel. It's beautiful. I really love your work.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning into Gutsy Talks. I hope today's episode left you feeling inspired to take the next step in your gut health journey. If you're ready to dive deeper, head over to rachellarson.com.au. There's a range of courses and resources waiting for you. If you loved this episode, I'd be so grateful if you shared it with others who might benefit from this information. And so you don't miss out on future Gutsy Talks, be sure to hit follow and leave a review. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm Rachel Larson, and I can't wait to connect with you again for our next Gutsy Talk.